What started as a routine late-night interview turned into television chaos when Hugh Jackman stormed off Stephen Colbert's show, following a brutal on-air confrontation that left audiences stunned and social media exploding with outrage. Stephen. Colbert emerged from behind his desk with his characteristic smirk, the studio lights catching the gleam in his eyes as he prepared for what he clearly anticipated would be more than just another celebrity interview. The audience applauded enthusiastically as Jackman walked out, waving and flashing his trademark smile, settling into the guest chair with the easy confidence of a seasoned performer. "Hugh Jackman, ladies and gentlemen," Colbert announced, his voice carrying an edge that seasoned viewers might have recognized as a warning sign. "The man who's played everyone from a singing circus owner to a mutant with metal claws, and now apparently thinks he can play political commentator too." Jackman's smile flickered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Well, Stephen, I think we all have a responsibility to speak up about issues that matter to us." "Oh, absolutely," Colbert replied, leaning back in his chair with theatrical exaggeration. "And nothing says, 'I understand the American political landscape,' like an Australian actor who splits his time between New York penthouses and Sydney mansions, right?" The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the unusual hostility in what should have been friendly banter. Jackman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media training kicked in. "I think caring about human rights and democracy transcends nationality, Stephen." Colbert's laugh was sharp and mirthless. "Human rights, democracy? These are big words coming from someone who made millions playing a character that literally solves problems by stabbing people with knives that come out of his hands. Tell me, Hugh, when you were cashing those Disney checks, were you thinking about human rights then?" The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras and lighting equipment. Even the usually responsive audience seemed frozen, unsure whether this was an elaborate bit or genuine hostility. Jackman's publicist, seated in the wings, looked alarmed and began frantically typing on her phone. "That's an interesting perspective," Jackman said carefully, his Australian accent becoming slightly more pronounced as stress crept into his voice. "But I think you're conflating entertainment with real-world advocacy. The X-Men films actually dealt with themes of prejudice and acceptance." "Oh, please," Colbert interrupted, his voice rising. "Don't give me the superhero movies are deep lecture. You know what's not deep? A multimillionaire actor lecturing working Americans about politics while living in a bubble of privilege that most people can't even imagine." The camera operators exchanged glances, clearly receiving instructions through their earpieces as producers scrambled to decide whether to continue rolling or cut to commercial. The show's longtime viewers had never seen Colbert display such open contempt for a guest, especially one as universally liked as Jackman. Jackman's famous composure finally began to crack. "I've never claimed to speak for working Americans, Stephen, but I have used my platform to support causes I believe in, just like you use yours. The difference is, I don't ambush my guests with personal attacks disguised as comedy." "Personal attacks?" Colbert's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "I'm just asking questions, Hugh. Isn't that what journalists do? Or are you so used to softball interviews where everyone tells you how wonderful you are that you can't handle a little scrutiny?" The tension in the studio was now palpable. Audience members were pulling out their phones, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Jackman's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white with the effort of maintaining control. "If this is your idea of journalism," Jackman said, his voice low and controlled, "then maybe you should stick to comedy. At least then people would know you're supposed to be funny." The audience gasped audibly at this direct hit, and Colbert's mask of smug superiority slipped for just a moment, revealing something uglier underneath. When he spoke again, his voice carried a venom that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. "That's rich coming from someone who thinks singing show tunes makes him qualified to have opinions about American politics," Colbert shot back. "Tell me, Hugh, when you're up there on Broadway 8 shows a week, Do you ever think about the people who can't afford $100 tickets to watch you prance around in sequins? The calculated cruelty of the comment hung in the air like a physical presence. Jackman's face flushed red, and for the first time in the interview, his famous diplomatic facade completely crumbled. The man who had graciously handled decades of interviews, press conferences, and public appearances was finally pushed beyond his breaking point. Standing abruptly from his chair, Jackman looked directly into the camera, then back at Colbert with undisguised disgust. "You know what, Stephen? I came here thinking I was going to have a conversation with a professional. Instead, I find myself being attacked by someone who's clearly more interested in cheap shots than actual dialogue." Colbert, perhaps realizing he had gone too far but unable to back down, pressed forward with reckless determination. "Oh, so now you're the victim? The poor misunderstood movie star who just can't catch a break?" But as Jackman began to remove his microphone, his movements sharp with barely controlled anger, it became clear that Colbert had finally met someone who wouldn't tolerate his brand of calculated humiliation. "Sit down, Hugh," Colbert commanded, his voice taking on an authoritative tone that seemed to shock even his own production team. "We're not done here." The host's eyes had a predatory gleam as he leaned forward, clearly intoxicated by the power he wielded in his own domain. Jackman paused, his hand still clutching the small wireless microphone pack. "Actually, Stephen, we are done. This isn't an interview, it's an ambush, and I won't be part of it." His voice carried the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of commanding Broadway stages and movie sets. "Oh, what's wrong?" Colbert's voice dripped with mock concern. "Can't handle a little pushback? I thought Wolverine was supposed to be tough." The audience cringed collectively at the juvenile taunt, many now openly uncomfortable with their host's behavior. The comment was a bridge too far. Jackman's eyes flashed with genuine anger as he stepped closer to Colbert's desk, his imposing 6'2" frame suddenly seeming much larger in the intimate studio setting. "You want to see tough, Stephen? Tough is building a career on talent, instead of tearing others down. Tough is treating people with basic human dignity, something you've clearly forgotten." Colbert, perhaps sensing he was losing control of the situation, doubled down with reckless abandon. "Basic human dignity? That's hilarious coming from someone who's made a fortune pretending to be other people. Tell me, Hugh, when you look in the mirror, do you even know who you are anymore? Or do you just see dollar signs?" The personal nature of the attack sent ripples of shock through the studio. Several audience members audibly gasped, while others began pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming a historic moment in television history. The show's longtime fans had never seen their host display such naked cruelty. "You know what I see when I look in the mirror?" Jackman replied, his voice steady despite the obvious effort it took to maintain control. "I see someone who's grateful for every opportunity, who works hard, and who treats people with respect." "What do you see, Stephen? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you see someone who gets his kicks from bullying guests who can't fight back." The word bullying hung in the air like an accusation, and for the first time since the interview began, Colbert seemed momentarily rattled. His carefully constructed persona of righteous indignation flickered, revealing something uglier underneath. "Bullying?" Colbert's laugh was forced and hollow. "I'm holding you accountable, Hugh. Someone needs to call out the hypocrisy of celebrities who think their wealth and fame give them the right to lecture the rest of us about how to live our lives." "Accountable for what?" Jackman shot back, his Australian accent now fully pronounced in his anger. "For supporting causes I believe in? For using whatever platform I have to try to make the world a little better? For caring about something beyond my next paycheck? For pretending you're just like everyone else when you're not?" Colbert replied venomously. "For acting like you understand struggle when your biggest problem is choosing between your Manhattan penthouse and your Sydney mansion." The audience was now openly restless, many shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the Stephen Colbert they knew. the clever satirist who skewered politicians and public figures with wit rather than venom. This was something darker, more personal, and deeply uncomfortable to witness. Jackman's publicist had moved from the wings to just off camera, clearly preparing to intervene if necessary. The show's producers were frantically gesturing from the control room, but Colbert seemed oblivious to everyone except his target. "You want to talk about struggle?" Jackman's voice rose for the first time, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "I worked construction jobs to pay for acting classes. I performed in dinner theaters for $20 a night. I auditioned for years before I got my first real break. Just because I've been successful doesn't mean I've forgotten where I came from." "Oh, please," Colbert scoffed, waving dismissively. "The struggling actor narrative. How original. Tell me, when was the last time you worried about paying rent? When was the last time you had to choose between groceries and medicine? When was the last time you lived in the real world?" The attack was so personal, so needlessly cruel, that even the camera operators looked uncomfortable. Jackman stood in stunned silence for a moment, clearly processing the depth of Colbert's hostility. "You know what's real, Stephen?" Jackman finally said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the now silent studio. "Real is using your success to help others instead of using your platform to tear them down. Real is treating your guests with basic respect instead of ambushing them with personal attacks for ratings." Colbert's mask slipped entirely then, revealing the petty jealousy and resentment that had been driving his attacks. "Don't lecture me about ratings, Hugh. At least, my show matters. At least I'm using my platform to hold people accountable instead of just singing and dancing for applause." The contempt in his voice was unmistakable, and it was clear that this had moved far beyond professional disagreement into personal territory. Jackman looked around the studio, at the uncomfortable audience, the shocked crew members, the cameras, still rolling, and seemed to come to a decision that would define the rest of the evening. "You know what, Stephen?" Jackman said, his voice carrying a finality that made everyone in the studio lean forward. "I've spent my entire career trying to lift people up, to inspire them, to bring joy into their lives, and you've just spent the last 10 minutes trying to tear me down for no reason other than your own twisted satisfaction." Colbert, perhaps sensing he was losing whatever moral high ground he thought he had, became even more vicious. "Spare me the saint act, Hugh. You're not inspiring anyone. You're just another Hollywood hypocrite who thinks putting on a costume makes you a hero. The only thing you're lifting up is your own ego and your bank account." The cruelty of the statement sent a visible shudder through the audience. Several people near the front looked genuinely appalled, while others were now openly filming with their phones, capturing what was clearly becoming a career-defining moment for both men. Jackman's face flushed with anger, but when he spoke, his voice was controlled and deliberate. "I never claimed to be a hero, Stephen, but at least I don't get my kicks from humiliating people who trusted me enough to come on my show. This isn't journalism or comedy. This is just cruelty disguised as entertainment." "Cruelty?" Colbert's laugh was sharp and ugly. "You want to see cruelty? Cruelty is millionaire actors telling struggling families how they should vote while living in their ivory towers. Cruelty is pretending you care about the common man while charging $200 for theater tickets." The personal attacks were becoming increasingly unhinged, and it was clear that Colbert had lost all sense of professional boundaries. His usual wit had been replaced by raw malice, and the audience was witnessing the complete breakdown of one of television's most respected hosts. "Those theater tickets support hundreds of jobs. Musicians, dancers, technicians, ushers," Jackman fired back, his composure finally beginning to crack under the relentless assault. "Every show I'm in employs dozens of people who have families to feed. What does your show do besides spread negativity and division?" Colbert stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward as he leaned across his desk toward Jackman. "My show holds people like you accountable. It cuts through the Hollywood BS and shows people what celebrities really are. Selfish, out-of-touch elitists who think their opinions matter more than everyone else's. The physical intimidation was unmistakable, and several crew members took a step forward, clearly concerned about where this was heading. Jackman, however, didn't back down. Instead, he moved closer to the desk, matching Colbert's aggressive posture. Accountable for what, exactly? Jackman's voice was now raised, his famous diplomatic facade completely gone. For supporting charities? For speaking out against injustice? For trying to use whatever influence I have to make the world a better place? If that makes me an elitist, then I'll wear that label proudly. There it is, Colbert pointed triumphantly as if Jackman had just confessed to a crime. The arrogance, the superiority complex. You just admitted you think you're better than everyone else. The audience was now openly uncomfortable, with several people heading for the exits. The show's longtime fans were watching their beloved host transform into someone they didn't recognize, while newcomers were witnessing what appeared to be a complete professional meltdown. I never said I was better than anyone, Jackman replied, his voice deadly quiet. But I am better than this. He gestured around the studio with disgust. I'm better than ambushing guests, better than cheap personal attacks, and better than whatever pathetic insecurity is driving you to act like a schoolyard bully. The word pathetic hit Colbert like a physical blow. His face turned red with rage, and when he spoke, his voice shook with barely contained fury. Pathetic? You want to know what's pathetic? A grown man who made his fortune playing dress-up and pretending to be a superhero lecturing me about professionalism. At least when I pretend to be a hero, I don't spend my time tearing other people down, Jackman shot back. You've turned into everything you used to satirize. A bully with a platform who mistakes cruelty for courage. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment the studio was completely silent except for the hum of equipment and the sound of audience members whispering to each other in shock. Colbert's hands were visibly shaking as he gripped the edge of his desk. How dare you? Colbert whispered, his voice trembling with rage. How dare you come on my show and judge me? You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've given up to be here. You don't know what it's like to carry the weight of actually informing people, instead of just entertaining them. Informing them? Jackman's voice was incredulous. Is that what you call this? You're not informing anyone. You're just venting your own frustrations on someone who can't fight back. This isn't journalism, Stephen. This is therapy, and I'm not your therapist. The brutally honest assessment seemed to strip away the last of Colbert's pretenses. His carefully constructed public persona crumbled entirely, revealing someone consumed by bitterness and resentment. The transformation was so complete that even his own crew members looked shocked. Get out, Colbert said quietly, his voice barely audible but carrying clearly through the now silent studio. Just get out of here before I say something we'll both regret. Jackman looked at him with something that might have been pity. I think you already have, Stephen. The question is whether you'll regret it enough to apologize to your audience for what they just witnessed. The studio fell into a deathly silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Colbert's face cycled through a range of emotions: rage, embarrassment, defiance, before settling into a mask of cold fury. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the venom of years of accumulated bitterness. Apologize? Colbert's laugh was hollow and bitter. The only thing I'm sorry about is that it took this long for someone to call you out for what you really are. You want to leave? Then leave. Go back to your mansion and count your money and pretend you're making a difference by singing show tunes. Jackman shook his head slowly, his expression one of profound disappointment rather than anger. You know, what's really sad, Stephen? I used to respect you. I used to think you were one of the good ones. Someone who used comedy to make important points, who held powerful people accountable without losing his humanity. But this? He gestured around the studio with obvious disgust. "This is just sad." The word sad seemed to hit Colbert harder than any of the previous insults. His face contorted with rage, and he slammed his hand down on the desk so hard that his coffee mug jumped, spilling its contents across his notes. "Don't you dare pity me," Colbert snarled, all pretense of professionalism finally abandoned. "I don't need sympathy from some Australian pretty boy who thinks he's better than everyone else because he can carry a tune and look good in tights." The crude personal attack drew audible gasps from the audience, and several crew members exchanged shocked glances. This was no longer television. This was a public breakdown being broadcast to millions of viewers. Jackman stood quietly for a moment, letting Colbert's words hang in the air like a toxic cloud. When he finally responded, his voice was calm and measured, which somehow made his words even more devastating. "And there it is," Jackman said softly. "The real Stephen Colbert, not the clever satirist, not the thoughtful interviewer, just a bitter man who tears others down to make himself feel bigger. I feel sorry for your audience, Stephen. They deserved better than this." With that, Jackman began removing his microphone pack, his movements deliberate and final. The small clip-on microphone came off next, and he placed both items carefully on Colbert's desk, as if they were evidence in a trial. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jackman said, addressing the audience directly for the first time since the interview, began, "I apologize that you had to witness this. You came here expecting entertainment, and instead you got a masterclass in how not to treat people. I hope Mr. Colbert finds whatever help he clearly needs." The grace and dignity in Jackman's words stood in stark contrast to Colbert's increasingly unhinged behavior. Several audience members began applauding, slowly at first, then building to a sustained ovation that clearly wasn't scripted or expected. Colbert's face turned an alarming shade of red as he realized his own audience was applauding his guests' criticism of him. "Don't you dare turn my audience against me," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "You don't get to come on my show and play the victim." "I'm not playing anything," Jackman replied with quiet dignity. "I'm just being myself, something you might want to try sometime." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back one final time. "Good luck, Stephen. I genuinely hope you figure out what's eating at you before it destroys everything you've built." As Jackman walked toward the exit, the audience's applause grew even louder. Several people stood up, creating a standing ovation that followed him off the stage. The cameras captured every moment: Jackman's dignified exit, the audience's support, and most damning of all, Colbert's face as he realized he had lost control not just of the interview, but of his own show. "Cut to commercial," Colbert screamed at his crew, but the damage was already done. The entire confrontation had been broadcast live, and within minutes, clips were already being shared across social media platforms with hashtags like Team Jackman and Colbert Meltdown trending worldwide. Backstage, Jackman was immediately surrounded by concerned staff members and his publicist, who had watched the entire debacle unfold with growing horror. "Are you okay?" she asked, her face pale with shock. "I'm fine," Jackman replied, though his hands were visibly shaking from the adrenaline. "But I think Stephen needs help." That wasn't professional disagreement. That was personal demons being played out on national television. Meanwhile, back on set, Colbert sat alone at his desk as his crew scrambled to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show. The audience was buzzing with excited conversation, many of them still filming with their phones, despite requests from producers to stop recording. When the show returned from commercial, Colbert attempted to continue as if nothing had happened, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. His remaining segments felt flat and forced, and when he tried to make jokes about the incident, they were met with uncomfortable silence rather than laughter. The aftermath was swift and brutal. By the next morning, clips of the confrontation had been viewed millions of times, with the overwhelming consensus being that Colbert had behaved unprofessionally and cruelly. Major entertainment news outlets ran stories about the incident, with headlines like "Colbert's Career Suicide" and "When Comedy Goes Too Far." Advertisers began pulling their spots from the show, ratings plummeted, and industry insiders started speculating about whether Colbert's contract would be renewed. The man who had built his career on wit and intelligence had destroyed it all in a single night of petty cruelty and professional misconduct. Hugh Jackman, meanwhile, was praised across the industry for his grace under pressure and his dignified response to an impossible situation. The incident, rather than damaging his reputation, only enhanced his standing as one of Hollywood's true gentlemen. The confrontation became a watershed moment in television history, a stark reminder of the importance of professionalism and basic human decency in entertainment, and a cautionary tale about what happens when personal demons are allowed to poison public platforms.